Hey, everybody. How's it going? This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you with a preview of a big Thursday night game coming up tomorrow night. Talking some football with just a few other headlines going on around the world right now. So hopefully talking some ball will bring some levity to some folks out there. But I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. And John, as we mentioned, gosh, what was it? Just a couple days ago, right on the Aftermath. This is a huge one for the Bengals and the trajectory of their season.
Very huge game. First of two Thursday night football matchups between the Bengals and an AFC North team. This one happens to be on the road, which is typically not great for the visiting team in this division. But hell, man, we had a show Monday. We had a nice interview with TJ Houshmandzadeh that premiered Tuesday. Coming back at you with Wednesday. It's like a whole new program over here.
Yeah, man. Sorry for all the episodes and all the can you go live, all the wonky scheduling, but it's been a fun week for our content and what we've been putting out there. And just to remind folks, if you are new here, welcome. We appreciate you tuning in live or after the fact. And you can do so on our YouTube channel, which can be found with our show icon underneath John's side of the window there. Click that, do the subscribe thing, the bell, thumbs up if you can. We appreciate that. And go check out our catalog of stuff, including that interview we had with TJ Houshmandzadeh. Some interesting stuff on there. Talked a little Jermaine Burton and Bengals past and present, which was kind of cool. You could also get this show on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel on the Believe Podcast Network, along with Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, as well as 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. So you got to resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy podcast feed to get access to that and get automatically refreshed episodes. And then of course we stream live to Twitter accounts and the Cincy Jungle Facebook account too, so you can catch us in a lot of different spots here. So John, if you wouldn't mind, let's talk about, because the Bengals put out an injury report. And unfortunately, we were pretty optimistic about things on Monday with T. Higgins. We kind of thought the prevailing thing was, they were sitting him against the Raiders really to rest him up for another short week, and then he'd be good to go against the Ravens. And I don't really know. I don't really understand the severity of what's happening here. Obviously, much more severe than we thought was just a kind of a tweak or a small pull, because now we're looking at 3 straight games potentially that Higgins is out, as he's listed doubtful as of Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of skepticism about this quad injury being a little bit more severe, and I think just the fact that it's such a quick turnaround from Sunday to Thursday doesn't help out his case. He may have been like maybe a game time decision if this game was on Sunday, but there's only one actual practice for this week, and it was a light practice Tuesday evening, so there wasn't really any time for him to kind of get ramped up and to be in game shape. So it's more likely than not he's going to be out. I think there was even a report from Jeremy Rao from Fox 19 that, he's probably not going to play. And again, just being a non-participant for 2 straight weeks is not good. And him, along with Charlie Jones, another receiver, he was also doubtful after he wouldn't have practiced this week if they had 3 practices like they would in a normal week. So that's 2 straight weeks for this receiving core to be down at least 2 receivers in terms of injury-wise. The expectation is that Jermaine Burton is going to play, and he's not going to be a healthy scratch like last week. So at least they have 4 receivers on the active roster that will be able to suit up, whereas last week it was 3, and then Kendrick Pryor being elevated from the practice squad. Pryor could also still be elevated from the practice squad to give them 5, but that is a decision that they're going to have to make either later today or maybe tomorrow. I don't really know the timing with Thursday night. It really just screws up the whole schedule with how these teams operate like this. But on the good side, Orlando Brown Jr. and BJ Hill would have been limited on Wednesday had they practiced. Again, this is an estimated injury report, and they are officially questionable for Thursday. So that's good news. Obviously, with BJ Hill, head coach Zach Taylor said that that injury ended up being a little bit more positive than they would have originally thought on Sunday when he injured it against the Raiders. So it's looking like he's going to have a chance to play on Thursday night. And with Orlando Brown Jr., we kind of thought that he was going to have a really good chance to play too. He was close to playing last week, and he would have been a limited participant Wednesday along with BJ Hill, and he did kind of practice on a limited basis on Tuesday. So it's looking like he's going to have a really good chance to play his former team in his former stadium.
We got a question here from our guy who helped preview the first go around, Justin of Engraven Vids. Go check out his YouTube channel as always. Justin, I would have asked you again to come on, my man, but we put this together a little short notice. So, but I appreciate you tuning in and asking questions. Do you think Higgins being out is any kind of a business decision? Obviously, talking about the contract, I do not. This is just personally speaking. I don't think that has anything to do with it, but I think it's just he gets these injuries, and some of them tend to linger longer than others, and that's just kind of what you get with T. Higgins. You get a lot of performance on the field, and you get a handful of missed games now per year with soft tissue injuries and that sort of thing that prevents him to miss sometimes critical games.
Yeah, this is just unfortunately, like you said, business as usual, and these soft tissue injuries don't appear to be going away from him until something drastically changes with how he kind of recovers and things of that nature. So the Bengals aren't necessarily new to this, and again, the fact that this is a Thursday night game instead of a Sunday night game, like the Ravens, for reference, they have 2 players who have been declared out. Tight end Isaiah Likely, he's out with a hamstring. He did not practice, or he wouldn't have practiced at all this week. And defensive lineman Brett Urban also did not practice. He's in the concussion protocol. Neither of them will play. And they have a cornerback in Jalen Armour Davis, who is officially doubtful after he would have been limited throughout this week. So it's tough for these players to have to play a full game Sunday and then have basically a really shortened week of rest up until their next game, and then they have to play 2 games in a matter of like 100 hours. So it's never easy, and especially for Higgins, even if this game was on Sunday and he didn't practice, for some of these injuries where it can get a lot worse before it can get better if you just aggravate it just a little bit. It's what happened with Mike Evans a couple weeks ago with the Bucs. He was playing on a bad hamstring. They had him run a go ball into the end zone. He ended up making it a lot worse than what it actually was. So it's tough for these guys to play through it, and especially on short weeks. I don't think it's that much of I don't I could play, but I don't want to play. I think it's just him just really just not being ready to play, and that's just another factor to it.
Yeah, and then just on the flip side, the big injury news for the Ravens was a lot about Lamar Jackson dealing with a couple of different issues, missed practice early this week, but John Harbaugh did say he would play. So he's not coming in supposedly 100%. We'll see if that how, if at all, it'll affect his great play. He and Burrow are both playing like MVPs this year. So, that's kind of the main one to watch there. Didn't practice early this week, but Harbaugh did say he'd play.
Yeah, and that's also been kind of business as usual for Lamar. He's missed some practices throughout the season, but he's always ready to play in game time. And it's been funny kind of watching and following it a little bit from a distance and how coy Harbaugh can be when talking about it. And he doesn't want to give away too much and whatnot. But yeah, Lamar missing practice is nothing new, and the Ravens are so locked in offensively, even with a couple of new pieces in there. He's always going to be ready to play Sunday, and he certainly was ready to play last time the Bengals played him.
For sure. Well, John, I'm going to throw you at least a little bit because we were going over stuff, and I'm like, I can't believe we omitted this topic when we were talking about a rundown. Yeah. And so I'm going to throw you a little bit of an audible here. We got to talk about this. The Bengals made a trade for Khalil Herbert, and a guy who limited touches with the Bears when he's been with them, but a guy who has shown some explosive ability, a guy who can do a little bit in the pass block game if you want him to, and really just a move of necessity. Bengals give up a 7th round pick for him next year, so minimal cost. The Bengals were also, we can talk about this in a minute, but the Bengals were also reportedly interested in some defenders. Didn't make that happen. But for now, the Bengals make a move that really corresponded with Zach Moss. Sounds like a scary injury there. A neck fracture, I believe, is what is kind of ending his season, supposedly. So, this is a necessary move. And just a sidebar, unfortunately, the injury bug has really hit a lot of the Bengals free agent acquisitions, be it short-term or long-term this year. Zach Moss, Geno Stone had the leg injury from a couple of weeks ago. And then, of course, Sheldon Rankins had some early season injury issues as well. So your thoughts on Khalil Herbert coming here? I think it's a good move. I don't think it moves the needle a ton, but I think that's a guy that can maybe give you, his nickname's Juice also. So you got a Juice on on defense and Cam Taylor-Britt, and one on offense now.
Yeah, if they combine on the practice field, I wonder what type of juice is going to come out. Wow. Pause. I would say that, like, first of all, I don't know how a neck fracture can happen in an NFL practice. Like, that's kind of crazy, but apparently it did happen between Thursday and Friday. So that's, like you said, a very scary situation with Zach Moss there. And there was a report over the weekend that the Bengals were looking at defensive linemen or cornerback at the trade deadline, and then Jeremy Fowler said they were calling about running backs. So they knew pretty quickly that something needed to happen at the position. They needed some reinforcements, and and then it turns out that Tuesday morning, which is after we recorded Monday's show, obviously they found a deal with the Bears, and for a 7th round pick, it's essentially just giving away a player for free. And what happened with Herbert was he kind of fell behind the depth chart between DeAndre Swift, who the Bears signed earlier this offseason, and Roschon Johnson, who I think we talked about a lot a couple years ago when he entered the league and how he could have been a Bengals targeted running back, and Roschon became the number 2. Herbert was a consistent member of that backfield for the first 3 years of his career, but he only carried the ball 8 times this year. He was a healthy scratch for the last 2 games of his time with Chicago, so he had been completely phased out of the offense. I think he was very intrigued and happy to get a new opportunity and a fresh start. And Anthony, I think the important thing here is that obviously with Chase Brown taking over as like the de facto starter and like the feature back in here, what does this mean for Herbert and whatnot? But it did seem like even if Zach Moss was still healthy, that Brown had kind of overtaken that spot as like the guy in the backfield, and Moss still had value as that pass protector and a guy who can catch the ball in the backfield and just to share the load and make sure that neither one was getting overworked and whatnot. But it was so necessary for the Bengals to add a guy like Herbert who was competent, who was better than Trayvon Williams or Kendall Milton, because there's obviously very little trust in either of those guys, but someone that can at least make sure that Chase Brown is not being overworked as he was progressing to the role that he has now. So I think whatever Khalil Herbert eventually progresses into after maybe a week or two within this offense is kind of more of what Zach Moss was going to be anyways. And this is just replacing Moss with someone who's a lot more fresher, who's only touched the ball like 8 times this year. So he's got a lot less wear and tear on him as of late, but someone who has experience in pass protection, isn't the greatest in the world at that, but that was Zach Moss's main value along with being a receiver out of the backfield. But this is still going to be Chase Brown's backfield, and I think for anyone who may own Chase Brown in fantasy or anything of that nature, like this is still going to be his backfield to own. This is just getting a guy in there to make sure that that bruised rib that Chase Brown suffered against the Raiders, it doesn't turn into anything more by touching the ball 25-30 times a game.
Yeah, and this is thank you for Greg Lippert here in our Facebook chat, given a PFF breakdown of 2023 backs. Apparently he was ranked 14th, top 15 PFF grade. So thank you, Greg, for that, doing a little homework for us. I appreciate that. Look, I think this is a good fit in a lot of ways. So we can look at last week and say, hey, Chase Brown is capable of, 30 plus touches a game and being productive and that sort of thing. The sample size of that, especially at the NFL level, is limited. So just taking that again against a struggling Raiders team, I don't know that you could just take that and run with it. And so I think bringing in a guy who is used to being a supplemental back in Herbert and a pretty productive one at that, and pairing him with Brown, who is probably, is now going to assume the mantle of, kind of the starter back, if you will. Still giving a quality option to spell him, and a guy that can do some things in the screen game, the pass catch game, pass protection game. I think it's a good move. Again, it's not It doesn't cure all your issues. And quite honestly, I know a lot of fans and whatnot were saying, where's the trade for defense? Where's the trade for defense? And I know there's some issues still on that remain on that side of the ball, but making multiple trades at the trade deadline, despite what you want to say about Duke Tobin and everything, it's still a big ask. Here's my thing with not getting another, and I've kind of thought about this a little bit. I'm going to try and be as eloquent as possible with it. The Bengals, it's not so much. The Bengals value obviously their picks, right? And they value their late round picks. I think it's not, for me, my issue with them not parting with them for somebody in a trade is not so much, man, why are you hanging on to a day 3 pick? That sort of thing. I wouldn't have an issue with them not parting with them if they were routinely collecting those picks and moving up every draft for quality players, more impact players, doing package deals on a yearly basis. It's been a little more frequent with Zach Taylor moving up, moving around in the draft, but this team has not traditionally packaged, those mid lower round picks to move back up into the 3rd round, move back up into the 2nd round, that sort of thing. And so that's where my frustration is when you don't make another move in a trade at the trade deadline. However, I still maintain the opinion that it's difficult for a team to make multiple trades at the trade deadline. I would have liked to have seen him make, maybe one more move. I think they could have done that, but I think that's where, if you get a little more nuanced with it, it's not just hanging on to those picks, not wanting to part with those picks. For me, it's, if you're going to hang on to the picks, okay, but be aggressive with those picks when the time comes, be it, in springtime for more trades or in the draft and packaging deals to move up for more impact players.
On top of that, also maybe hitting on some of those day 3 picks a little bit
more
than you normally do.
Yeah.
But I mean, we talked about it on Monday when we said, like, if we expected anything to happen, and it was more along the lines of adding like a pass rusher or a cornerback. And the thought was that, yeah, like they're going to try and they're going to have those conversations, but it all comes down to, do they actually want to give up a pick that's beyond what could be like a pick 210 or whatever, which is what this 7th round pick that they gave up for Khalil Herbert. And the deal makes sense, right? They had an immediate need and they found like a capable player who could fill a niche role that could play some time. Like that move would be pretty standard across the board for any NFL franchise that you can think of. But of course, when it's the Bengals and it's the first time, I really do think it's the first time in team history where they just traded a single pick for a single player, and they didn't get it, like there wasn't like a player swapped involved, there wasn't like a pick swapped involved. It was just trading a future unknown draft capital asset for a known commodity in real time. And that's like, it's huge for them. But of course, then it becomes an afterthought a day later where we forget to talk about it in the first 10 minutes because it's such a standard move for an NFL team. So yeah, like if they were to double down, and per reports, it seemed like they were still interested in going after a defensive tackle, and there were some that appear to be available, and none of them really got traded off. Like Arden Key, Sebastian Joseph Day, Azeez Ojulari, Jadeveon Clowney, all players who were involved in trade discussions. None of them ended up getting dealt outside of maybe a couple of them. So like it didn't seem like there was a ton of movement from those teams in terms of the negotiation process. So I don't know if the Bengals completely whiffed out. Like maybe if a lot of those players got dealt, you would be able to criticize the Bengals more for not making that deal, but you would still, again, like a 6th round pick for a guy that can play immediately and help out your pass rush, that should have been a no-brainer, but it didn't happen. And now you're here with the Bengals, and you can identify that this move in a vacuum was a positive, but you're still left wanting more because the Bengals did need more.
Yeah. Well, Bengals make a trade for Khalil Herbert. He may play Thursday. Zach Taylor was talking about it on Tuesday, saying, we'll evaluate, but there also may not be good reason for him not to play. So he may get integrated right away. And to what level, I don't know. Sounds like Burrow's anxious to kind of use him in the offense as they see fit. So, the Bengals make the trade for Khalil Herbert, and it's kind of a rare move for them. But I think it's, overall, I mean, would you have a grade for that, John? Grade for that move?
Like a B, like a 7th round pick rarely turns into anything, but this is someone that you need right now, and I think is still a capable player, even if his role again with the Bears was completely diminished. But he's more valuable and now needed with the Bengals, and I think he can still contribute. So for a team that still wants to, compete now with the roster at hand, like it's a message to the team that, yeah, we're not just going to completely sit on our hands in this one. But again, it doesn't move the needle that much, and you weren't giving away that much for this guy in return. So it's like a B.
Yeah, that's about what I'd have it. All right, let's move on and talk about this game against the Ravens. And just want to remind folks to subscribe to the podcast through your favorite audio streamer, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, and leave a review if you can. That'd be helpful if you could do that. Subscribe to the feed on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. So get it through your favorite audio streamer. And then, of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the show icon underneath John and the subscribe button there. So go ahead and do that if you would. And you can also see a stream across a couple different Twitter platforms and the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. So, I mean, this kind of ties into, keys to a win and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get to in a minute, John. But I don't know. What are some lessons learned in this first one from that first game that the Bengals absolutely need to carry into this one? I mean, I would think the first one for me is if you get Lamar Jackson in your grasp, as hard as this is, and as easy as a concept as it is, if you get him in your grasp, you got to get him to the ground. He made way too many plays off script, including arguably the one of the year with Sam Hubbard on him. And, Sam kind of had him and hand fought him all the way to the sideline and slid off of him. I think Trey had a grasp of it. And so with Trey playing the way that he is, Sam Hubbard, kind of picking things up since that game. And he had a couple nice plays in that game too, but Sam Hubbard picking some things up, Bengals defense playing a bit better, albeit the opponents notwithstanding. Getting Lamar Jackson to the ground once you have him in the grasp is just crucial.
I'm sure Sam Hubbard's still replaying that play in his mind over and over as this matchup gets near and near. But yeah, like defending Lamar Jackson is harder than ever because he's no longer constrained by an offense run by Greg Roman. I think Todd Monken has really opened up what they want to do, and now he has a new receiver in Deontay Johnson that he can throw the ball to. So that's Zay Flowers, who's having a career year, Rashad Bateman, Deontay Johnson, Mark Andrews has come back to earth. He's got a lot of options at his disposal, and it is equally hard to defend against them when you blitz him or if you just drop back 8. So the Bengals pressured him like 40% of the time in that first matchup, and it hardly even mattered. I think they sacked him once or twice or something like that, and he made more plays against them than they made plays against him. Disguising your blitz is better. Maybe have some fire blitzes. Try not to go all out towards him because you see that with other teams that don't play the Ravens as much. When they feel like that they have Lamar on an all-out blitz, he just quickly just zooms out of the pocket and finds someone downfield, and he's so good at throwing on the run. He's not the most accurate thrower down the field, but he can launch the ball at different arm angles, and he can find guys well down the field on the run better than most guys can. And that's why he's been so efficient this year, and his playmaking ability is off the charts. So you have to be smart, and you have to pick your shots at when you want to be aggressive at Lamar. And their best games against him in the past have always been when they can just contain him in the pocket and just kind of mush it to the point where he has no escape angles and just basically collapse and condense it as much as you can. And it takes your athletes on the edge to be athletes, right? You need Sam Hubbard to play like he has historically played against the Ravens outside of this past game, but even still, he had that safety against Derrick Henry, so he can still show up against this team. And Trey Hendrickson is obviously needed there. Miles Murphy, that was his first game back against the Ravens back in Week 5, so he needs to play phenomenally. And there's more pressure on him and Joseph Ossai since they didn't add an exterior pass rusher to this team. There's more pressure on them to step up. So it's going to be really hard though if you give up another 41 points to beat them in their home stadium. It just cannot happen again.
Yeah, and the other lesson I would say that the Bengals need to take heed of is what they did. In the stat line is deceiving because Derrick Henry actually didn't have a good game until the very last run of overtime there, where he had 50-yard 50-yard run that got him close to a 100-yard day. Up until that point, he was not doing much of anything. And the Bengals were clamping down on him. Other running backs and Lamar had some plays and that sort of thing. But obviously, the ability to stay with the Ravens in this one resides in clamping down on Derrick Henry. The Bengals did a good job of that the first time for the most part. I know the last run where, I think unfortunately morale was pretty low and they just kind of more or less gave up after that field goal miss. But I think you take note of that if you're the Bengals defense and Lou Anarumo.
Yeah, and the reason why morale was so low, as you mentioned, is because of what happened the possession before. The Bengals got a huge break. They recovered a Lamar Jackson fumbled snap, and then they ran the ball 3 straight times and settled for a 50-yard field goal or whatever, and it ended up being botched. And that's how the Ravens were able to ultimately win that game. The best version of the Bengals are the Bengals who remain aggressive in a smart way, and they allow their strengths to flourish. It's such a notable thing, I think, that after that terrible 4th down call against the Eagles, where Joe Burrow threw the ball behind the line of scrimmage to Jamar Chase, that the first 4th down opportunity the Bengals had against the Raiders, it's like a 4th and 3 at the Raiders 20-something yard line, and you had basically a concept where Burrow had multiple options down the field. He was able to survey, and he was able to buy time and look down the field, and he found Tanner Hudson wide open over the middle. When you give Burrow the ability to process after the snap and take advantage of picking apart a defense in that regard, which he does so well, that just puts you in so many better spots than just having him throw the ball immediately. And we talked about how the Bengals failed to learn their lessons, and at least that time they did, and they took upon something, and they remained aggressive in a wise way. And you have to do that in a game where you don't feel like you're going to get a lot of possessions, and that's always a topic of conversation against the Ravens. So that's the mindset that the Bengals need to have. And I think we had a question from Kevin Kutch in the comment section about personnel changes without Eric All. Take advantage of what you do best with the personnel that you have. Like against the Raiders, they kind of evolved back into a spread offense where they had Mike Gesicki kind of acting as that 3rd or 4th receiver. Go with that again, man. It's going to be hard to go under center and run the same concepts that you like, that you no longer have that tight end and Eric Gall that can be multi-versatile and have that type of skill set where you can do multiple things out of it. The personnel that you have at this point, even without T. Higgins, you're just a drop-back passing team that runs the ball at a shotgun. That's what you do. The Ravens defense is still exploitable in the terms of against the pass, and you have one of the best quarterbacks in the game. You have to take advantage of that and just do what you can.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit, kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit. The key to a win, players. That what needs to happen here. There are a lot of things I can think of, but I'm going to be very interested to see how they deal with Mark Andrews and who lines up there. We saw both DJ Ivy and Jordan Battle go up against Brock Bowers last week. I'm curious to see, there was Ivy had a pass breakup that I think ended up being a pass interference penalty, and then Battle got beat on one and then had a pass breakup as well. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work and who's going to line up there. That's one element. And obviously, you can't let him get to you. He's pretty good.
And I mean, we can't forget about Derrick Henry either, right? Like it's that run at the end of the game obviously kind of boosted his stats, but he's been dominant against pretty much every other team that he's gone up against. And I think as the season has gone on, they've learned more and more about how to best utilize him. And when he gets to the edge, man, it's just tough. And the Bengals defense is still in a spot where they want to condense things as much as possible and just take advantage of, kind of gathering at the ball when it's being run up the middle. So if the Ravens kind of come at an emphasis where they want to attack the perimeter, you have to lock down the edge and force things back inside. Obviously, with Jordan Battle, I think him playing more than Von Bell last week was a little bit notable. I think it's the first time that's happened. So he needs to continue to play well. And I think Geno Stone needs to play better than he did against the last time that the Ravens came to town. So that's important as well. And I think Gesicki is another just guy that stands out too, because I think the Ravens do a better job at limiting those types of players than I guess the Raiders would in this case. Like Kyle Hamilton, I think can match up with him pretty well. That's a one-on-one matchup that I'm very interested to see. Jamar Chase, if he can pop off like he did a few years ago against the Ravens, that would be very helpful. Again, just do what you do best. Be aggressive. put the ball in Burrow's hands more times than not. You're not going to be able to run the ball as well against the Ravens as you were to do against the Raiders. You still want to try to give Chase Brown some opportunities and put him in concepts that he's comfortable with, but you got to ride the hot hand, especially on such a short week.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a cliche about turnovers, winning the turnover battle and stuff, and obviously, I think that's a big key this week. But the very few turnovers that Burrow has had this year, they've been killer. Two of them have gone for touchdowns, a fumble recovery against the Chiefs that got them back in that game. And then obviously it didn't really hurt a ton last week, but the pick six kind of gave a tiny bit of life back to the Raiders. So his turnovers, while you can overcome them, and in those games he largely played well. They've come at really inopportune times. They've been big plays. So yes, winning the turnover margin, but unfortunately, even if he's throwing 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, a bunch of yards, that one turnover when the Bengals were driving to score against the Ravens the first time around, that interception, that was killer. So you got it. You just cannot afford to leave points on the field, and especially not in committing turnovers.
100%. And, outside of that 2021 game, it's been kind of a struggle, I think, for this offense to put up a really good outing at Baltimore. It's a tough place to play, and especially on such a short week. Like, they were on pace, I think, for, like a 27-point game this time last year before Burrow went down with that wrist injury. And that's another talking point that I'm sure like that's been brought up plenty of times this week with him. But yeah, it's tough to, put up a lot of points in the Ravens stadium. And like this game's just going to be really high intensity on such a short week. Mistakes will be made, and these games typically end up being bloodbaths. So do what you can to stay as clean as possible, but it's very unpredictable in these environments, and a lot of things kind of get thrown out there. But also, I would be remiss to say, like, last time around, Zay Flowers like just did whatever he wanted, right? And it's always been tough to kind of limit him, especially this year for any defense going up against him. And I'm interested to see what the plan is this time, if there's any sort of adjustment, whether that's following a guy around him or just having a guy bracket on top of him, whatever the case may be. It's been really tough to, I think, isolate him in the game plan, and if he goes off, it's just really tough to stop that offense.
Yeah. Well, we've spent a lot of time this week in a lot of different episodes, so we're going to go a little shorter, I think, on this one. What do you have for predictions on this, John? How do you see this one going? Because I'm all over the map on this one personally.
I think the Bengals can win this game, but I'm just not expecting it. I think, again, it's going to take – I think it's going to take probably 30 points to win this week. I think the Ravens are just firing on all cylinders. They're going to be hyped up for this one. Obviously, the Bengals have a lot to prove, but historically, again, it's just really hard for AFC North teams to win on short weeks against fellow AFC North teams on the road, and it's not ideal for the Bengals to be back in the situation, but I think Burrow himself said that the NFL loves to have similar matchups to last year when there was a big injury. It's what Aaron Rodgers did on Monday Night Football this year when he tore his Achilles last year. And of course, the NFL puts the Bengals back on Thursday Night Football almost the same exact week in Baltimore for this exact storyline, and it doesn't do them any advantages. And I just think the Ravens are too good right now, and it wouldn't be surprising if Burrow just hero balled himself to like a really close victory, but I'm expecting something like 28-16 Ravens.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Bengals do need to score a substantial amount of points. I just don't know, like you said, the trend for away teams on short weeks, and really both teams on short weeks, it just kind of makes for a lot of sloppy football. So I don't know that I see this big high scoring thing, but obviously Bengals scoring a lot of points is something that would go a long way in their favor. I see that the Ravens should be the favorites, and they are in this one. The only thing that really kind of gets me going in the Bengals corner a little bit is just Burrow's demeanor and level of play right now. Mm-hmm. The fact that he's kind of really dialed in, and the post game deal was don't celebrate this one. the whole deal. And we got a big one this week. So he seems pretty locked in. I think the team is going to be locked in. And I'm wondering, what's going to go on now this week after the whole Jermaine Burton saga. We haven't really talked about that. And, I'm curious to see what his integration is into things. But I'm going to go 23-20 Ravens, but it would not shock me if the Bengals come out with the win either, just because of the demeanor this week of Burrow.
It helps when your quarterback is feeling himself and he's locked in. And honestly, like there are definite disadvantages to playing on Thursday night, but at the same time, it kind of forces you to just prepare a lot faster. And all of a sudden the game is here, and there's no time to kind of think about things and be intimidated. And of course, I'm not saying that the Bengals are intimidated, but I think just going on such a short rest, it just makes everything just in the moment, and you're just able to kind of play loose and everything. And there's not a lot of waiting for this very, very important game to happen, because if the Bengals do win this game, their playoff odds, I think, increase over 50%. They're kind of in position to be one of those last wildcard teams. And if they don't win, then the margin of error is basically zero at that point, and you're just hoping that you can sneak in as a wild card if you beat other teams ahead of you on the schedule, like the Chargers and the Broncos, who are also vying for those spots. So the importance of this game cannot be understated in terms of just having somewhat of a, not comfortable, but a likely path to the postseason, and that's definitely on their minds. And I think just being on the short week, that's like the one advantage of, like, everyone needs to lock in immediately. And I think that after such a game last Sunday, that's the one thing I think that they have going for them for sure.
Yeah. And then, of course, you got the big one after the long week, now on prime time, Sunday Night Football, Bengals and Chargers. So big one there. Let's drop the mic and get on out of here with some final thoughts. John, what do you got for us on our way out the door?
Yeah, so we talked to TJ Hushmanzada, as we mentioned earlier this week, and Anthony had the courage to ask him about Jermaine Burton, and I really liked what Hush had to say about it, because Hush is always candid and he doesn't hold back anything. I didn't want to report. There was a picture, I guess, of Burton at Cincinnati's Hard Rock Casino. It wasn't confirmed, but everyone's kind of running with it, right? So I didn't want to talk about it or report on it or anything. But I did think it was interesting how Jamar Chase was talking about how he missed a meeting. I think it was week 4 or week 5 of 2021, and then the game after that was the game against the Ravens. Or it was week 7 of 2021, and that was when he posted 201 yards against the Ravens in that touchdown. It was one of his I've arrived in the NFL moments, and that was what he called his apology for missing that meeting, and how he was not used to the schedule of the NFL life and the responsibility of making sure that you're on time and you're fulfilling all your responsibilities and whatnot. And it's kind of poetic that Burton has a very similar opportunity after he completely screwed up last week and was a healthy scratch. The Bengals need him, especially in this game, because they need as much offensive firepower as possible going up against that offense. So I'm really, really interested to see how Burton responds, and hopefully he got his gambling fixed out the way.
Yeah. I know that kind of went viral. If it indeed was him at the casino and stuff, I didn't really feel. I felt a little icky sharing and commenting about that and stuff, and taking pictures of a guy while he's backs to you. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about all that, but regardless, it is what it is, and I hope. He was pretty. Hushmanzada was pretty open about that. I hesitated asking, but I know people want to hear. It's kind of a big topic, and I know people want to hear about it. So it was kind of fun to do that, to talk with him and hear about that. I don't have all that much other than again, just go check out that interview with TJ, courtesy of Tide and the Tide Tackles campaign there. So go check that out. We appreciate that. There'll be some articles up on Cincy Jungle, and I think these next 2 weeks will definitely tell us a lot about the Bengals, because this whole quality opponent thing is hanging over their heads. We talked about it. TJ talked about it. They've got to start beating good teams. They've got to start beating quality teams, and they have to do better in the division. They already do have a division win this year, which ties what they did last year. But that was against the struggling Browns, and multiple quarterbacks went in and out of that game. So they need to start not only beating quality opponents, but they need to show that they can beat, top tier teams so that they can get into the playoffs and have confidence getting through the playoffs.
And this rivalry has been very equal throughout the later years of the Marvin Lewis era and the beginning of the Joe Burrow era, and it's really kind of taken that shift towards Baltimore over the past 2 years. It's a great chance to kind of even the scales a little bit, and just beating Lamar Jackson is just a rare thing for Joe Burrow and company, and they're riding high right now. That crowd's going to be so hyped, and it's going to be a very hostile environment. There's not going to be a lot bigger statement games on the schedule for the Bengals than this one. It'd be a phenomenal way for them to win.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for us on the Orange and Black Insider. We appreciate you all tuning in live and or after the fact. We'll be back to talk about the Bengals result. Hopefully we're talking about a win back at 500 and getting excited about the game in LA. John, have a good rest of your week, man. Enjoy tomorrow, and we'll be back at it to break it down.
See you guys.